Welcome to our channel. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let's get started. The 53rd card. Written by Jules Wilder. It was a rainy night when Detective Lila Stone received the call. The speakeasy was tucked away in the corner of a forgotten alley, its dim red sign flickering against the downpour. Inside, the room was filled with thick cigar smoke that clung to the velvet drapes lining the walls. The soft hum of jazz music hung in the air, but the usual lively chatter had been replaced by a tense silence. The walls were covered in vintage photographs, half obscured by shadows. The poker table, illuminated by a single hanging lamp, was the center of it all, its green felt surface stained with spilled drinks and cigarette burns. Charlie? Dean lay slumped beside the table, his lifeless body blending into the dark wood floor. His hand, still gripping a stack of poker chips, was frozen in a rictus of surprise. The men around the table sat stiffly, their faces pale, their expensive suits and ties betraying the high stakes of the night. Lila Stone stood out in the room, her black trench coat soaked from the rain. She brushed back her damp hair and took a slow, deliberate look around. "Any signs of foul play?" Lila asked Officer Bennett, who was crouching over the body. "No obvious signs. No gunshot wounds, no stabbings, just collapsed," Bennett replied, standing up and shaking his head. Lila scanned the room again. The smell of whiskey, old leather, and sweat hung in the air. "Heart attack?" Bennett glanced around the tense room. "Maybe, but I don't think anyone here's convinced that's all it was." Lila stepped toward the poker table. The cards were scattered, the game abandoned. "Who's playing tonight?" "Tony the Snake Vasquez, Ralph Briggs, the club owner, Henry Waller, and Jake Reeves." "First night for Jake here," Bennett said, pointing to each man in turn. Tony leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his slicked-back hair shining under the dim light. His dark shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and a silver chain hung loosely around his neck. He smirked as Lila's eyes fell on him. Henry Waller, a lawyer by day, was dressed immaculately in a gray three-piece suit, but his usually calm demeanor was shaken. His hands trembled slightly as he fidgeted with the handkerchief in his pocket. Jake Reeves, the youngest at the table, was wearing a navy blazer that looked too big for him, as if he had borrowed it to fit in. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around the room, wide with fear. "All right, let's get their stories," Lila said, moving toward Ralph, the club owner. "Ralph, you knew Charlie well?" Ralph cleared his throat, beads of sweat still visible on his brow. Yeah, he's been coming here for years. High roller, always in for big bets. But tonight something was off. He was edgy." "Edgy?" Lila asked, her tone skeptical. Ralph nodded quickly. "Yeah, more nervous than usual. He kept watching the new guy, Jake, like he didn't trust him." Lila's gaze shifted toward Jake before turning back to Ralph. "Why do you think that was?" Ralph hesitated. Charlie didn't like unknowns. New faces made him uneasy. Lila took in Ralph's nervous fidgeting before moving to Tony Vasquez. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, his casual arrogance unnerving. "You were dealing tonight, Tony?" "Yeah, I dealt," Tony replied, his voice smooth and confident. "But don't look at me, detective. I kept it clean this time." "Did anyone else touch the deck?" Lila asked, narrowing her eyes. Tony shook his head, his grin widening. Once the cards were on the table, it was fair play. Lila watched his cocky smirk for a moment longer before stepping over to Henry Waller, who was dabbing his forehead with his handkerchief. "Henry, did you notice anything strange before Charlie collapsed?" Henry avoided eye contact, his voice shaky. No, detective. One minute we were playing, and the next, he was just gone. I thought he choked." Lila studied his fidgeting hands before asking, "Did Charlie say anything before he went down?" Henry bit his lip, hesitating. He said something about Jake, that he didn't trust him. Lila finally turned to Jake, who was practically trembling in his oversized blazer. "Jake, your first time here?" Jake nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, but I didn't do anything." Lila's brow furrowed. "Did Charlie accuse you of cheating?" Jake's eyes widened. "No, I didn't cheat. I swear, I didn't do anything." Lila studied him closely, but there was no confidence in his eyes, only fear. She glanced at the poker table, the cards strewn across it. "Bennett, count the cards." Bennett quickly flipped through the deck and frowned. "Detective, there's 53 cards here, one too many." Lila's eyes narrowed. An extra card means someone was cheating. The room grew heavy with silence as all eyes turned to Jake. Lila's gaze bore into him. Jake, you brought an extra card, didn't you? Charlie caught you and you panicked. Jake's face went even paler. No, I didn't cheat, I swear. I don't even know how that extra card got there. You didn't? Then why did Charlie keep watching you? Lila pressed. I don't know, Jake cried, his voice cracking. I didn't do anything wrong. Lila took a deep breath and nodded to Bennett. Cuff him. As Bennett pulled Jake to his feet and snapped the cuffs onto his wrists, Jake kept shaking his head. I didn't do it, detective, I swear. I didn't cheat. Lila turned away, ready to leave. But just as she was about to step outside, something nagged at the back of her mind. She paused, her eyes scanning the poker table once more. She walked back to the deck of cards. Picking them up, she began flipping through the cards, examining each one carefully. After a moment, she pulled out 2 identical jack of spades. These aren't just from different decks. This one's been tampered with, deliberately trimmed, Lila said, holding up the cards for the room to see. She looked up at Ralph, who was now avoiding her gaze. Ralph, you knew Charlie would catch on to the cheat. That's why you planted the extra card, knowing Charlie would accuse Jake, and while everyone was focused on Jake, you poisoned Charlie's drink. Ralph let out a long sigh, his voice heavy with defeat. I've been running this underground poker club for years, but lately, things haven't been going so well. Business hit a snag, and Charlie, he was starting to catch on. The guy had a knack for spotting cheats, and he began to suspect I was rigging the games, skimming off the top. If word got out, it'd ruin me, my reputation, the club, everything I've built. He glanced at Lila, then back down. Charlie was too sharp, too good at reading people. I knew I didn't have much time. If he exposed me, the whole operation would collapse. I had to stop him. So I planted the extra card, knowing Charlie would accuse Jake. It was the perfect way to shift the blame, keep everyone looking in the wrong direction. As Bennett uncuffed Jake and moved toward Ralph, Lila added, You played 1 card too many. We hope you've enjoyed this mini audio story, written by Jules Wilder. If you love immersing yourself in more thrilling tales like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and stay tuned for more exciting stories coming your way. Thanks for listening.